Alright, today we're going to be doing a review of Canon's very popular 50mm f1.8 lens. Now, I definitely consider this to be a pretty misunderstood lens, and let me explain why. Now, to start off, this lens is extremely cheap. It retails new for $125 US, but I've seen these being sold used very often for around $80 US. So this is an extremely cheap lens, and I'll explain why in a minute. But because of the very cheap price, most people just assume that this lens is designed for beginners. Now, the reason why I wouldn't necessarily consider this to be a particularly good beginner lens is, if you're giving it to someone who's still learning their DSLR, isn't necessarily comfortable shooting all manually yet, they really won't be able to take advantage of what this lens has to offer. How I see it, to someone who hasn't learned a bit about photography yet, this is nothing more than a broken version of the 18-55. It can't zoom, it doesn't have image stabilization, and you have to be a lot farther to focus. So unless you actually have enough knowledge to understand and take advantage of the aperture range of this lens and other such things, the pictures you'll get from this won't actually look any better than from the 18-55 kit lens. So if you were considering buying this alongside your kit lens, or buying this instead of a kit lens, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But on the other hand, if you are comfortable shooting manually, and you do have the knowledge to take advantage of an f1.8 lens like this, then I would highly recommend it. Now, going back to what I said before, let me explain why this lens is so cheap. Now, this lens is about as plasticky as it gets. As you see, of course, it does not have a metal lens mount. Now, most parts of this lens honestly don't feel really any cheaper than what you'd expect from, say, the kit lens, but the focus ring feels like it could be from a McDonald's toy. So the reason this lens is so cheap has nothing to do with bad image quality or anything like that. It is a very plasticky, very cheap built lens. So if you're doing something that could risk damaging the lens, you will have to be especially careful. Now, what about what actually matters, and that's image quality? Now, most people will automatically just leave it at f1.8 and take advantage of that really fast maximum aperture. Now, f1.8 is very useful and can help you from having to get a less preferable shutter speed or having to raise your ISO, so in certain situations it can be extremely helpful. But if you do have a lot of light available, whether it be sunlight or studio lights or flashes or anything, I would actually recommend stopping this down, because at 1.8 the image quality, there's nothing bad about it, but it really doesn't look much better than what the 18-55 can produce. But once this is stopped down to f5.6, I'd say to around f11, that is when the image quality on this is superb. Like, this is a lens that could take seriously fantastic looking images that are totally, completely sharp, even when you crop in all the way. So like I said, if you do a lot of shooting in situations where there's a lot of light, then this lens is going to be great. But if you're going to need to always be f1.8 to get the light levels you need, you really won't be able to take advantage of this lens to its best ability. Now, something that people don't always mention about this lens is the minimum focus distance. And as you see here, the minimum focus distance is actually 0.45 meters or 1.5 feet, which honestly really isn't all that close. And if you're used to the 18-55 lens, which can get much closer than that, you will definitely feel impeded by this. Now, believe it or not, because the 18-55 can go so much closer to this subject, I find 50mm f1.8, despite having a much wider aperture, can't get as narrow a depth of field as the 18-55, simply because of the closest minimum focus distance. So that is definitely something you should be aware of. If you feel you'll be able to take advantage of this lens, I'd highly recommend it, but honestly, if not, it honestly isn't that much of a necessity.